Evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics podcast, where we explore political matters of international, national, and local importance in a calm, reasonable, and measured way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sainsbury. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the show. I know we've probably thrown you a bit by having our episode on a Saturday instead of a Sunday evening, but other commitments have brought that about for us. So, what are we looking at today?
Well, as Sir Keir Starmer bids us farewell and Andy Burnham appears to hoy into view, I guess that's 7 prime ministers in not very long. So I think we're going to have a look at the way that's come about and ask ourselves the question, why, what, and, have we become ungovernable as a nation?
Yeah. At the moment, it looks like Burnham is the only likely contestant in a leadership election. Well, we'll see whether that trends to pass. If he does, then essentially he's going to be anointed on July 17th, which will, as you say, be our 7th Prime Minister in 10 years. Just to refresh everybody, shall I quickly run through our panoply of Prime Ministers? There's no points for getting them right. Do let us know in the comments what you think, and please don't forget to give us a comment or a like, and do follow or subscribe depending on where you're catching us from. So way back in the depths of time, David Cameron, 2010 to 2016, entered office as part of the coalition, a Conservative-led coalition with the Lib Dems in 2010, then was re-elected as PM in 2015, but stood down after losing the EU referendum, so the Brexit referendum on June 23rd, 2016, replaced by Theresa May. She lasted from 2016 to 2019 in a fit of struggling to kind of get what she wanted to do through Parliament. She decided to go to the country with an election in 2017, which actually reduced her lead, causing her to rely on the security, a confidence and supply agreement with the DUP and about £1 billion worth of funding for issues in Northern Ireland. She was then, of course, replaced by Boris Johnson in 2019, who frustrated with Parliament not doing what he wanted to and having prorogued it. So in English, that means closed Parliament to stop MPs voting. Called a general election in 2019, and then was returned with a 80-seat majority. But that didn't work out for him. He was replaced by Liz Truss in 2022, who 56 days later herself was replaced, the second shortest serving prime minister in the country's history. Rishi Sunak took over from her in 2022 and left office in 2024 when Labour won the general election, electing Keir Starmer into power as PM, who's going to be replaced sometime in the next 3 weeks or slightly longer if there's going to be a contest by insert name here, likely at this point to be Andy Burnham, but that could change. So, that's how it is now.
Yeah, and fascinating when you look at those. You've obviously got to ask yourself who was your favourite. That's obviously something that I'm sure all our listeners and viewers will be thinking at the moment. I was always a David Cameron man. I thought he was great. But yeah, it is that element when you look at that kind of, as you say, that list. How many jumped, how many were pushed, how many were abandoned by their party rather than kicked out by the electorate.
Well, the only two that came into office as a result of a general election were David Cameron and Keir Starmer. And the only person that left office because of a general election was Rishi Sunak.
So and I guess it's the reason why I kind of call that out early is we always think, it starts to play to that, well, I didn't vote for him /her. I think there is still this concept that pervades social media and in other places that we elect a prime minister. But I guess when you look at those seven, soon to be eight, I guess, of those eight, only two of them, 25% for those of you who are statistically minded, have actually been elected by, have gone into an election with the general public wanting to be prime minister and winning a vote to get there.
Yeah, it's quite the conundrum, isn't it? It doesn't exactly inspire strong and stable. But should we have a look at how that kind of compares to
Yeah,
the
so
historic situation, so we can look at that
yeah,
we can compare the two.
compare
So
and contrast. So
compare and contrast.
you've gone forward seven. Let's go backwards seven from
Yes.
Call Me
So let's
Dave.
go back in time. Sorry. Insert sound effect here,
Yeah,
please. So prior to David Cameron, there was Gordon Brown, who
Texture Like Sun, as the Stranglers sang.
who moved up from Chancellor of the Exchequer to Prime Minister in 2007, but lost the election to the coalition in 2010. He, of course, was preceded by and so Gordon Brown. Although there was much talk at the time about whether in I think it was 2008, that whether or not he was going to go to the country
Yep.
For an election. And then there was the financial crisis, so that kind of went quickly off the boil as an idea. But he replaced Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister from 1997 to 2007. So was elected into office in 1997, also won an election in 2001 and in 2005.
So a 10-year gig then.
Yes. So so a long term. So he, of course, was elected into office, ousting John Major, who, as the Conservative Prime Minister, served as PM from 1990 to 1997. He faced the electorate in 1992. Obviously, faced them again in 1997, but didn't win. But he was the victor of the leadership race that was started, that essentially took Margaret Thatcher out of number 10, and she herself served from 1979 to 1990.
So again, another 10-year, well, in her case, 11-year term.
Yes. So a stonking term. So facing the electorate in 1979, 1983, and 1987. She, of course, ousted James Callaghan, the Labour Prime Minister who served from 1976 to 1979. But he didn't face the country. He replaced Harold Wilson, who was elected in 1974, served till 1976, as we just said, but faced the electorate twice in 1974.
Yep.
That's not a typo. That is true. But in 1974, he indeed ousted from office the Conservative Edward Heath, who served as PM from 1970 to 1974, who faced the electorate in 1970. So when you kind of look about the previous seven, that takes you all the way back to 1974 from from 2010. So quite 36 years instead of 10 years for 7 prime ministers.
And two of those prime ministers in that time served 10-year terms.
Yes. So I mean, obviously they skew the average, but if the others weren't necessarily that lengthy either. But it's interesting just how many times there's been more of it in the past 7 years, but there has quite clearly obviously all been examples in the prior 7 prime ministers of them being replaced without going to the country. And of course, we don't elect a prime minister. We don't have a presidential system. The party with the highest number of MPs in the country forms a government, and their leader is the prime minister, and that's how our system works. So so quite the kind of mixed match. But it was quite a shock to think that in 10 years we've done the same number of changes that took 36.
Yeah, and I guess there's that element of and it's it's something we saw in the I guess in terms of the the transition from Blair to Brown was a kind of managed transition, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't active warfare. It was a kind of gentleman's agreement.
Well, sort of. There did seem to be whether that was true behind the scenes, but certainly in the press at the time, there was a lot of speculation about how eager Gordon Brown was to basically take the reins, and how reluctant Tony Blair appeared to be to relinquish them. I think until probably he'd hit the magic 10 years. I think maybe that's what the thing
Yeah,
was.
yeah, and so I guess when we look at it in terms of that sort of ousting of the sitting leader, obviously Thatcher ousted by her party. But if we then fast forward, I guess what we can't really avoid is some, the pivotal thing in 2016, which started this run, which is obviously Call Me Dave Cameron, who wrapped his hand in after losing the Brexit vote.
Yeah, well, it seems that casting our minds back to at that time, the government of the day that strongly supported staying in the EU made no preparation for a plan to leave. But I think what shocked everybody was that the people that were in favour of leave and were selling the concept of leave to the country also didn't make any plans for what to do if they actually won, because I think they expected someone else to be doing it because they weren't the government.
Yeah, I know, and I think that there is that interesting thing, isn't there, about that whole sort of power vacuum.
Mm.
Because again, since then, lots has been said, in the mainstream media and on social media about Brexit and the Tories took us out of it was a Tory plan to take us out of Europe, and it's like, oh, hang on, you know, um, David Cameron was the leader of the leader of the Remain campaign, and obviously punted him into sort of semi-obscurity and consultancy. Um, so I guess it's that element of, you know, is do we are we seeing 2016 as something more significant in terms of, some people will blame the fact they've lost their keys on Brexit. Um, but does 2016 just tell us something more about societally we want something different? Is that where that sort of thread begins?
I mean, possibly it was certainly the most visible political upheaval and event that signified that there was something fundamentally broken, perhaps behind the scenes, or wrong, or bubbling over in British
Mm.
politics. We could probably spend an entire episode discussing what we think the precursors to Brexit, or what led up to it, and why Leave won. But nonetheless, they did. I don't know quite so much whether I don't think I'm in the camp of some people would say that essentially all of the chaos that's happened since is all the blame of Brexit. It certainly hasn't bloody helped. Um, but I can't help but think that in a society where we're ever distilled into our different echo chambers, where we don't seem to be able to even agree on facts that much anymore,
Mm.
um, that actually, is it any wonder that there's kind of this kind of constant disagreement? We seem to have a rapidly disposable environment and a short attention span, and actually we live in a complex world that needs complex answers. And when someone says they've got the simple answers, you should elect me because I've got the simple answers, that's easy to say to get elected. But then once they're in office and they find out that it actually isn't that simple, and then have to then start explaining difficult choices or hard stuff, or not changing things for the better as quickly as people would hope. People quickly think, oh well, if we don't like this one, we'll just get another one. It's like kind of renting a
Swipe left.
video. It's this kind of swipe left. It's the Tinder or the grinder culture of, oh, I don't like this one so much anymore. I'm bored with this one. I'm gonna swipe on. Apparently, so people say. So
Allegedly.
yeah, allegedly. So
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know whether it's more that than that. And I think there's other things behind the situation Starmer's faced himself in. But
Well,
yeah, I
I
don't think
think.
Brexit's the cause, but I think it's certainly among there's correlation and
Well,
it's not bloody hell. What do
well,
you
I
think?
think there is. Yeah, and I guess there's that element. If we just sort of run through them quickly, I think Theresa May was undone by the fact that you know she in terms of she was the person who stepped forward when Cameron exited stage left,
Mm,
and there's that. I would argue that probably most of us had never really heard of Theresa May or seen her as a you know potential political heavyweight or leader. Um, and so that sort of period, and I remember us covering it. There was all those. Do you remember the great indicative votes in Parliament of what sort of flavour Brexit we wanted?
yeah, I
And
mean,
every one of them fell. It was like,
well, yeah, neither, and to be fair, I think I think there's a bit of a segue there in the sense that actually the voting system, both in Parliament and in the country, might be behind. I think actually is no longer fit for purpose in the sense that actually we don't have two-party politics really anymore. We probably have a 5-6 party politics, more if you're in Scotland or in Wales, um, and and our electoral system isn't kind of set up for that. We've got a government that was elected with a massive majority with only 30% of the vote. So
well,
that we can't we and again Brexit was another Brexit itself was a referendum was another example of not most of the complicated things that we face in life are not binary choices. There are a multitude of choices, and one might be your preference, but a lot of the others, okay, I hate this one a bit less, but I'd rather have that. And maybe that might be a different kind of thing of if there was whether we had PR, whether we had transferable votes, so that at least the majority of people got something they remotely at least agreed with, even if it wasn't their preferred solution. You're not then disenfranchising basically most of the country because the person that the party that won the race it is that I'd just kind of coming back with Theresa May because there were other candidates in the leadership race, but didn't Andrea Leadsom pull out in the final round because there was a publicity hoo-ha about something that she'd said about
yeah.
being a parent, and she'd pulled out, and that essentially left Theresa May as essentially the last candidate standing, and therefore was anointed.
Well,
Um,
and therein lies some of the machinations, doesn't it,
yeah,
around the party politics, which has which has a part to play in this,
mm,
because I always find it fascinating when we sort of talk about consensus government and we talk about the tribalism of two-party politics.
yeah,
And if we look back to the start of your splendid graphic, we start in 2010, don't we?
yeah,
Where for the first time in a while, going back the all 14, for the Conservatives, the Labour lost, were not the majority party, the Conservatives were. And I know there was a lot of talk at the time that the Lib Dems, almost Labour expected the Lib Dems to come and form a coalition with them, to keep the continuity of what would have been a sort of more left-leaning coalition. Um, but the strange kind of the fact of that period was that the Liberal Democrats chose to form the coalition, and I'm sorry I'm saying the C word because I know it triggers you as a Lib Dem. Um, it actually ended up, and if you look at objectively at that period, as anybody who's politically interested, who isn't a zealot on the far right or the far left,
mm-hmm.
what we actually ended up with in that period from 2010 was some pretty reasonable, balanced government.
Yeah, indeed, it was actually well, actually, certainly if you look back now, with a further 10 years of hindsight, that 5 years turned out to be actually be probably 5 years of stability. Not everybody will agree about to do with policies to do with austerity, and we won't go into that. That's obviously kind of getting us down into another rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
actually, when you look back on it, yes, that was actually a time where we did actually have strong and stable government.
Yeah.
It seems
And
that the thing that pulled the rug from that veneer was indeed the Brexit. Was indeed actually the Conservatives winning a majority in 2015. So they were no longer in a coalition where they could perhaps reluctantly barter away their offer of a referendum and explain that to their backbenchers. Having won the majority in their own right in 2015, they then had to carry it out. Had a disastrous strategy when it came to convincing people why we should stay in. Lost it, and then, well,
and then, as I say, the rest
the
is
rest is
history.
history.
But I just think it's fascinating that through what had been for me a reasonably, a period of political kind of, political stability, with consensus politics from a left and right leaning party. The electorate rewarded the Lib Dems for their time in bringing in progressive policies, like the personal tax threshold. They rewarded them by, was it 52 down to 7?
I
The
thought
Lib
it was 8, but I'm not gonna promise to eat
Yeah,
my hat,
it was a massacre
which I think
anyway.
what
Yeah,
Paddy Ashton did
yeah,
live on TV, wasn't it?
yeah.
So it, yeah, it, and I think there's also a disparity to between where parliamentary parties are. So the mood of the group of MPs of that party in Parliament, and
Mm.
actually where the membership are. I think there's a they're in slightly different. I think the two different groups are in any party are on a slightly different place in the Overton window.
Well, definitely, because again, somebody who, if we can look at that period sort of from Theresa May through to Boris Johnson, at the same time running alongside Theresa May was obviously Jeremy Corbyn,
Yes.
who was massively popular with his, with the party faithful, and was massively unpopular with the Parliamentary Labour Party. And it's been said before, hasn't it, that I think I can't remember whether it was 2017 or 2019 that Labour actually polled pretty much the same number of votes as they did in 2024, but got massacred. Um, and probably the only time in that period where the membership and the parliamentary party was aligned was when the Conservatives um, elected Boris Johnson, who was very popular with the members, seemed very popular with the party, and kind of rode into, you know, again, you mentioned strong and stable. He had an oven-ready Brexit, and he was going to get Brexit done, and rode into the office on that kind of wave of popularity. Um, and that was probably the only time when the membership and the party, the parliamentary party, were aligned. And I guess if we look at the demise of Boris Johnson, Simon, was it the Conservative Party doing for him, or was it I kind of look at parallels between him and what's happening now with Sir Keir Starmer, which is kind of, they've both gone under pressure from their own party because the popular the voting populace have fallen out of love with both of them. Would
I,
that be
I,
fair?
I think so. I think there's a bit. I mean, obviously the circumstances behind Johnson's fall from grace, if I can phrase it that way, are very very different. I think if you're a populist leader, you're
Hmm.
only useful if you continue to be popular.
Correct.
And the moment you become unpopular, unless you've got some other rabbit to pull out of your hat, you are no fucking use. So so you get dispatched, and essentially at the end of the day, eventually the Conservative Party in Parliament chucked enough letters into the backbench. So just to explain to the listeners and viewers, the Conservative Party has something called the Backbench 22 committee, which essentially is formed of certain members of Parliament for that party, and led by certain key figures. And essentially, if the chair of the Backbench 22 committee receives the required number of letters from MPs saying there should be basically they have no confidence in the existing leader of the party, then essentially a leadership contest is called. And I forget what the figure is, but it's a percentage of the number of MPs that they have in
Yeah.
Parliament. Labour have a similar mechanism. If there is a leadership contest, to be in the leadership contest, you've got to have the support of at least 5% of the parliamentary party. So in this case, that means the minimum is 81.
Yeah.
But they don't have something like they don't have a mechanism that automatically triggers
Yeah.
that triggers a leadership contest. But nonetheless, you kind of still end up in the same place of actually the rest of and it speaks to us having a prime ministerial and a parliamentary system rather than a presidential system. The country doesn't elect the prime minister. The country elects the party, and the party with the most MPs says, well, this is our person. And that person essentially says to the monarch, I have the support of the majority of MPs in Parliament, and I can form a government. And then the monarch essentially says, away you go, fella. Obviously, they'll phrase it slightly differently, but essentially, kind of that's how that works. If you no longer have the support of your own team in Parliament, again, what good are you to them? And then
Yeah.
you kind of get to that you kind of get to that point. So it is interesting to see those machinations at work and the stark difference between our system and, for example, the American system, where there isn't, aside from health grounds under the 25th Amendment, I don't think there is really any way for them to remove the existing
No.
president.
No. And I think it is important, isn't it, to look at that period in terms of Jeremy Corbyn was almost put on the Labour leadership as a as a
As a
kind of, well,
token far
we've
left
got to have
person.
a token one from the far left, and the membership said yes, thank you very much.
It was the Boaty
But the
McBoatface choice, wasn't it?
Well, exactly, and in the Labour system, they got a choice of a number of, they get a choice of a lot of, the candidates. It's down to the membership to whittle it down.
Yes.
Whereas under the Conservative system, the parliamentary party whittles it down.
Yes.
And there is that fascinating piece when you looked at the election that elected Liz Truss. There were I think originally 6 or 7 on the ballot paper, including our local MP Penny Mordaunt, and Kemi Badenoch was also on that list. And the parliamentary party whittled it down to leave the members with the choice of Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak.
So
And
do you think they kind of deliberately do that to leave? And I'm putting words in other people's mouths here, to leave the party to leave the membership with a respectful and reasonable choice and someone that's batshit crazy that no one would want to vote for. So it's a
well,
so it's a.
and that again, I've been
Do
very
you think they
open
set it up
about.
that way?
Yes, that and to be honest, there was that element of it is the reason why in the end I left the Conservative Party, because Liz Truss was always sixth or seventh on that list in terms of popularity with the members. But there's that element of the parliamentary party ended up offering the members their choice, Richie, or Liz, who was never what the party wanted. And I have no no kind of compunction in saying, if you try and bully me into doing something, I won't do what you want me to. So I voted for Liz Truss, as did the majority of the Conservative members, and
Do you
you
think
know,
there's a bit? Do
it.
you think that? Do you think there's a bit of that bloody mindedness also about the Brexit vote?
I think
You've
there's.
told
I
us
think
that it's
there's.
awful and we won't cope with that if we leave, and
I,
that we
I
and basically that we're so terrible. Well, my life can't get any worse. Screw you. I'm going to do this anyway.
there's a bit of. I think there's a bit of both in it. It's
Mm,
that element of I want change.
yeah, I'm so
And
desperate. I'll vote for anything, but I want it to change.
yeah, and so if you look at it, Liz was a disaster. And so the Conservative Party at that point made absolutely certain that the members wouldn't get it wrong this time by not offering them a choice at all. And they got their posh boy, Rishi Sunak, across the line with no contenders, so the membership didn't get a vote. Um, but I think for the challenge for Rishi at that point was it didn't matter what he said or did. Um,
The ship was already sinking, and
it was
by the
it had
last couple
sunk.
of
He was
weeks,
he
no
was
one was paying
yeah.
attention to what he was saying. In the same, not being funny, in the same way that has happened to Starmer now. No, it doesn't. He could cartwheel down Downing Street. It wouldn't make
No.
the slightest bit of difference because he's yesterday's man now. But
Well,
do you think that? What was the point I was going to make? So I find that interesting, but you're kind of making the point there about the political part. Sorry, about the parliamentary parties deciding not to actually put the question to the membership. So in the same, the Conservatives did that. Once Liz Truss had been after 56 days, 2 weeks of which she was basically not really working, but not really governing because Her Majesty the Queen had died.
yep.
Do you think so? There's kind of an interesting. So it's one thing to have a protracted leadership contest and a policy debate when you're in opposition, because
Yep.
you're not being funny. You're not buggering up anyone else's life. But actually, if you're the party of government and you're going to pull this lever, you're going to basically kick your leader out. Do you still think that that it's that it's fair rather than arrogant to actually then put that back to the membership, rather than actually no, you need to kind of get the most obvious person into 10 Downing Street because you have an obligation to the country to not cause that much chaos. Do you think that's a valid argument or not?
Well, I think it's about party politics, isn't it? And for me, the if you look at representation,
Mm,
then if you are asking somebody to pay a membership to be part of a party, and the democratic process says that that person should represent you, it is a moot point as to whether the leader, the most high profile member of your party is chosen by a group of a few hundred members rather than potentially the thousands that you've got
mm.
that are paying their membership. So I think the protracted leadership discussion is definitely something that needs consideration. But I guess if we look at it, in terms of does it end well when when a leader is kind of thrust upon the nation? Um,
Yeah,
and
I,
you,
sorry, go
you
on.
know, I think there's this element of you know Andy Burnham is going to be crowned king. Um, the belief is that, or the
Watch
kind
on
of
Monday morning when we're completely proving we're
well, yeah,
against him.
I know this is one I'm pretty confident on.
Yeah.
I guess the arrogance is that the belief that the parliamentary party see him as a saviour. Um, there is an element of because he is further to the left than um, Sir Keir Starmer, that the membership kind of like him more than they do Starmer.
Mm,
It is that interesting balance for the Labour Party that the membership are further left than the parliamentary party, but the far further left leaders that even through that period, I remember John Foot and Jeremy Corbyn and what you would see as further left kind of traditional Labour figures are very popular with the Labour membership, have never gone down particularly well with the electorate. So I just I do wonder whether the interesting thing I think for Andy Burnham is that I think he's going to get a bounce, but it's that question of, and this is when we take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
Mm.
You know, most of the Gorton and Denton and Makerfield has been reform preaching it's all broken, it all needs to change, it's all broken, it all needs to change. So they're playing very much into this anything's got to be better than what we've got now, which has that lineage back to the Brexit vote.
Mm.
um but
So,
so far every attempt to get change.
I find another interesting parallel is that in 2024, obviously, the majority of voters, sorry, the obviously the party that won with a stonking majority
Yeah.
was Labour. Again, with only a 30% or so vote share, but nonetheless, that was the largest share of the vote. So the country was quite kind of divided. But it kind of struck me that actually at that point, and given how vague they were on some policies and how much they painted themselves into corners on others, the country wasn't necessarily voting for them. They were just voting
Mm.
to use them to basically to enact the change that they wanted, which was to basically punish the Conservative Party for being so bloody.
Well, it wasn't a vote for anything,
No,
was
exactly.
it?
That's the
And,
that's the
and I
point.
think that's the
That's the
point you
point
were
I'm trying to
making
make.
is that,
But but
yeah,
I'm but I'm kind of trying to follow that up with the point that the vote to get rid of Starmer by the Parliamentary Party, or the moves to get rid of Starmer by the Parliamentary Party, to replace him with someone who doesn't have policies that are tested that are in a manifesto or that have been tested with the electorate, that some to some degree kind of seem to be in one place or the other. Have we just reached again for this one is rubbish? I'm going to change. I don't care who I change to, but I just need to change. Have we? Are we in danger of repeating the same thing?
oh God, yes, yeah, no, absolutely, because there is that element of, and this is where it's this fascinating thing about grown-up politics, isn't it?
Mm.
Which is, we've covered this so many times. You know, your macroeconomic options are spend more or less, tax more or less, borrow more or less. Those are your three levers fundamentally. Your fourth lever is growth, which is the one that everybody gets excited about because that's where the pie gets bigger. Um, and if you remember, growing the economy, was kind of it was something that the Labour Party talked about in the run up to the election. And then for the first few months when they got into, how many times did we hear 20 billion black hole? And things are so much worse than we thought they were. We've got,
Yeah,
and you
yeah. I
talk down the economy and it doesn't grow.
Well,
So,
I mean,
and
to be fair, there's no point in pretending things are better than they are. I don't mind. I don't really have a problem with the government telling us hard news and telling us stuff that is tough to swallow, and essentially there are going to be tough choices. The problem is that usually governments say that there are going to be tough choices, but they already have an idea about who
well,
that's going to be tougher for. I think it's one thing to say that our number one priority is growth, but then have policies that do the opposite.
but this is the point though, Simon. There is a placebo effect,
Mm.
which is that if the government talks down economic prospects go down. And in
I
the
don't
same
deny that, but
way,
there's no point
and in the
pretending that they're
same
great when they're not.
well, and it is, and again, we're slightly
Mm.
off topic
Yeah, we've gone
But
down it.
if but
How many
but if
rabbit holes have we gone past?
well, it's going to be one of those episodes. But if you look at President Donald Trump in his first term of office
Mm.
before COVID, the growth figures in America were astonishing through a confidence trick of just saying how great America was and was going to get greater. So there was an element of talking up economic growth by just creating a feel good factor. Even if you go back to, and again, if you go back to Mr. Tony Blair and those boom years of cool Britannia, there was an element of a lot of that. And I'm not saying you can magic it out thin air, and I'm not saying you should pretend and all of those things, but there was a positivity and an energy around at that time that did have a bearing. And we talk about Rachel Reeves and her red lines. You know, that meant sort of tax more was off the table. You've got a load of newly elected Labour MPs, spend less was off the table. And, the cost of COVID and then the Ukraine war meant borrow more was off the table. So, there is
Yeah,
an element of everyone sort of stood there looking at each other saying, well, kind of, what are we going to do then?
yeah. I don't entirely disagree. I just think if I think about you think about 1997, the reason why Tony Blair, and it wasn't actually an immediate change overnight. I think we kind of
Yeah,
do our memory a disservice. It wasn't kind of plain sailing and someone flicked a switch, but they had clear and demonstrated and publicized vocal policies about how they were going to make things better,
yep,
and
yep,
they went and did them.
yep,
That to me was kind of the difference. I just wanted to, if we can kind of put a pin in that for a minute, because
yeah,
like you
yeah,
say, I think we've gone a bit off a tangent. Just talking about kind of leadership elections, just in comparison, for listeners. So both the Labour Party and the Conservatives use basically a multi-round form of first past the post election to select their leader, unless there's some sort of thing where either people fall, basically pull out, or there's some sort of agreement otherwise. Um, the Lib Dems, I don't know about the Greens or about any of the other parties. I don't know that Reform can have a leadership election, but I would happily um, be be corrected in the comments. But the Lib Dems, for example, their leadership elections, in fact, all of their internal elections, are dealt with by single transferable vote. So you rank your candidates in order. You don't need a multi-round
yep.
process. Essentially, the person with the least number of votes gets discarded, and their then second preference votes are then redistributed, and you declare a winner. So
Hmm.
in that respect, you don't have to have this multi process fight to the death between over. I mean, it was interesting how what Wes Streeting said the other day. Contest over ever smaller differences. You don't kind of need to have that, but you also then have this coalesce. You coalesce around a candidate where you're guaranteed at least more than half of the party, to some degree, agree that this person should be the leader.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think there's very very much a case for that. I guess it's that element of it is the piece where if we move forward here, um, you know it doesn't look like the Labour Party elects or the country elects. I think everyone is saying that Andy Burnham is going to be the next Prime Minister. But I do wonder, in terms of we don't know what his policies are. You kind of hope that things would get better with buses because that appears to be his forte. He's very good on buses. Um, but I think probably the country needs more than buses. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see which way he goes. And I guess there is that piece where almost in the microcosm of the country, and again, just is the fact that the Reeves Starmer combo couldn't get a lot of stuff, even with the massive majority they have, I don't know that they could get stuff through their own internal party. You
I
know,
think there were battles that they were facing within and without the party,
mm,
and for sure it seems that they weren't very good at basically selling their own message, or at least making it clear kind of what the plan was, um, or it's instead of um, you know moldy bread today, it's jam tomorrow. It's
mm,
it's moldy bread today and moldy bread tomorrow. Um, so I think they could have done that. It did seem that when you look kind of across the media, there was not me funny. There were certain parts of the media where I don't think actually he could have done a bloody thing. He could have there was anything he could have done that wouldn't have actually essentially made him a source for quite some unreasonable attacks. There were misinformation campaigns, some suspected to be created or at least influenced by enemy foreign states. Um, so there's kind of a lot of things going on. And we kind of talked about this last week. I'm just
mm,
kind of conscious that it's only really worth changing something if the change changes something. And if you're changing the person, that's one thing, but it isn't necessarily the person or the personality that is the blockage. Yes, that didn't help because he's not a great orator. He's obviously not used to the cut and he's more used to making logical and reasoned argument in a legal chamber rather than actually in the dispatch box in Parliament with the Punch and Judy show in the playground point scoring politics from Kemi Badenoch, who basically just lands punch after punch on him. How that'll be kind of different, I don't know. Is it a combination of us as a country are ever more impossible to please because we're all off in our own little silos and therefore we aren't kind of coalescing into a melting pot of, or at least I'll get some things that I want to happen or some things
mm.
that are important to me, even if not all of the things that are being done I like. There's at least something for me, so I don't feel like the country and the government is completely ignoring me. It doesn't seem to
Yeah,
be any more of that. Is it that we're impatient? Is it that
I,
we're not willing to listen to basically that we need to take the tough medicine to find the to plant the trees that we won't sit under? Um,
well, I yes is where I've got to on that, which is that I don't think we do grown up politics anymore. Because if we were to stand back and be forensic, there's an awful lot of stuff that the government that's been in for 2 years hasn't done. But there's also some stuff which it has.
yes.
And so if I just pick three things, you know, our beloved NHS, often, lots of noise around the NHS and how it's not, and the waiting lists have come down.
Hmm.
If you pick, the lifting children out of poverty, the scrapping of the two-child benefit cap, you know, definitely achieved some of that. And in terms of, one of the beloveds of the reformists is net migration, and net migration's down 82%. So there's something for everybody there, and obviously there's a counter argument against all of those about benefits Britain, or you're still spending all of our money on housing asylum seekers. So all of that we can ignore, but you've got three pretty big wins there in 2 years.
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody can reasonably make the case that they haven't done anything or that they haven't had any successes. They quite clearly have. They haven't rode into Parliament. See, 1997 also had the benefit of riding into Parliament at the point that the financial crisis that preceded it, the recession that preceded it, was it 92, 95, was
Yeah,
abating, and actually the economy was on the up. So they
yeah,
had the money to be able to make the choices that they made.
yeah.
And if you've got money, you can make choices. If you don't have money, you have to make difficult and harder choices. And we seem to be in the latter situation. And now, in the last 10 years, all of the things that are facing the country are tough political decisions and tough financial decisions. So none of that's going to be an easy answer. It just kind of, I just don't know how we break the cycle of this populist 3-word slogan, policy by headline politics, and actually come back to a point of, these are the problems we're facing. These are the solutions from the Conservative Party. These are the solutions from the Labour Party. These are the solutions from the Liberal Democrats. These are the solutions from the Greens. And you decide whether, which kind of a solution aligns best with your values. But now it seems the oxygen is taking up arguing about point-scoring culture wars, or about things that aren't actually really going to make a huge amount of difference to the country. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I didn't suspect we were going to find it in our podcast.
No, I think it's fundamentally different to that, Simon. I think it's whichever party is in office, they might give you something of what you want.
Yeah.
But they're not going to give you all of what you want, or the majority of what you want.
No.
Even if they're your team. So unless you're ideologically wedded to a party, I think this is which comes down to the societal piece. Because again, I'm not a Labour fan, and I've given you three things there that I think across the political spectrum, whether you're to the left on the 2-child cap, in the centre with the NHS, or to the right with net migration, there's something there for everyone. But actually, even if you've won on one of those, you'll look at the stuff that you haven't got, or you'll look at the stuff that needs to happen and say no. So if I give you a couple of other examples, there was the Labour Party wanted to do something around the welfare system, and the backbenchers blocked it. The Labour Party knows that they've got to do something very significant about defence spending, but they don't know where the money's coming from. So there is that piece of with limited scope and with limited money to play with, whichever lever you pull upwards, it is that element of someone is going to dislike it and point at the thing you haven't done. The waiting lists in the NHS have come down. Record money's been poured into the NHS. The resident doctors got a pay rise that eroded the years of neglect from the nasty Tory government. Or the Labour Party continues to pour money into a bottomless pit. They gave the resident doctors a big old bung because they're one of their union chums, and they're no better off because they still want another 10% pay rise. I'm being playful, but I'm using it as an illustration of how.
Yeah,
do we just look at what we don't have?
Yeah, I can't speak for everybody else, but I don't expect to get all of the things that I want. But I do look for movement in the right sort of direction, and even if it's not all of the, even if it's not all of the policy change or all of the amount of change in a certain direction, we at least have some sort of change that moves kind of in the right sort of direction. I think it's a false narrative to say that it should be a combat between deciding whether to put money into the NHS or into schools, or it should be a competing argument between welfare and spending money on defence. There are different things that you would need to do in different areas, and indeed there are answers already being presented in other countries, already being enacted in other countries, to help find ways to find the extra money that's needed on defence. And also, defence is just as bad as the NHS in the sense of, if you just chuck money at it, it will never be enough. But if you find, and that doesn't mean it's not important, and that doesn't mean it's not valued, and it doesn't mean that the people that don't work in either of those, it doesn't mean that the people that work in those organisations don't deserve to have the best training, the best facilities, and the best equipment and the support from their government that they should have. They absolutely bloody should have. I'm just conscious that if we just suddenly, even if we could just suddenly find loads of money, that would just disappear, like rain disappearing into cracks on the pavement. It would disappear into places that won't necessarily be funding the things that we might find ourselves, God forbid, I hope we don't, needing in the next 5, 10, 20 years. I think there are difficult questions, but there are also sensible questions about how do we spend this money effectively? How do we find the money in the economy? And there are places in the economy where actually there's a not being funny, there's a lot of harvesting of profit, where that is not being reasonably taxed, and actually more normal people on normal incomes and smaller businesses are paying the price of not being able to tax those things for people that are doing spectacularly well. That doesn't mean we quite have to get the red book out, but there is a difference. But there are also, war bonds or the like that you could get to raise money to help with defence. I think so. What I'm trying to say is that I don't think it has to be one or the other. I don't think you have to play off defence against the benefits. I think you can push lots of different levers a little bit, rather than necessarily pushing one all the way down in order to put the brake on another one. I think that's where we need kind of sensible answers.
And that's why
that's why I'm not in government.
No. You've been listening to a party political broadcast from the Simon Sainsbury Party. And yes, that was me humming the red flag in the background. So again, before we descend into chaos and farce, 2 last points. Andy Burnham, next Prime Minister?
Well, I think that's pretty much a certainty at this point. There were whispers this week that Al Khan's was going to stand, but I think that seems to have dissipated over the course of the week. And
you don't get long to think about it. It's a one word answer.
Oh, well,
no, but you said yes.
But the way you phrased the question didn't ask me for a yes or no question.
All right. I'm going to ask you for a yes or no question to the next one then.
Okay, go on.
2029, Andy Burnham, next Prime Minister.
Do you mean? So you mean will Labour win with Andy Burnham as leader in 2029?
Yes.
I can't give you a one word answer to that. I would hope so, because at this point all the alternatives are awful.
So that's a hope so. I'm going to give you a straight answer.
Okay.
No, because by 2029 the electorate will have had enough of Andy Burnham and will be looking somewhere else. God. On that bombshell, if we're still going in 2029, you'll still be listening to the Pompey Politics podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury. Please do remember to give us a like, follow, comment, subscribe, etc. wherever you are catching the podcast. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time. And I've been Simon Sainsbury.
Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.